A big welcome back to our listeners and viewers of The Responsible Edge, brought to you by the Andrew Greenwash Charter. Today, this sunny April morning, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Andy Norris. Andy, you and I met seasons ago now, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for finding the time to come on.
Absolutely. It's, an honor to be here. Been looking back at, obviously, some of the other podcasts before this one. It was quite scary. Some amazing people with incredible achievements. But just a fantastic opportunity and honor for me. So thanks for the invite, Charlie.
Andy, I think that's a lovely introduction. The honor is very much mine, and I hope that you're saying that at the end of our conversation. We'll see whether or not we've still got that sense as we head towards the crescendo of things. But let's start now. Those of our listeners and viewers who aren't aware of you and your background and experience, I kind of want to spend the next sort of 20 minutes or so introducing them to you, but I want to go back to the very, very beginning, if possible. And, those formative, perhaps childhood, perhaps adolescence, perhaps early part of your career, those formative experiences that have really shaped your worldview and sort of affected your take on ethics, responsibility, and sustainability. Just take us back there to perhaps some of those earlier experiences you can recall.
Yeah, well, I guess I would probably go right back to the very, very beginning. I was born in Liverpool, and I think that has defined me, to a great degree. I grew up in a period of great challenge and austerity within the city, politically, during the Margaret Thatcher years. And I think it's very much political discourse and discussion, it's probably a polite way of terming it, was very much, part of just day-to-day life, around the family dinner table. My dad was a teacher. My mother was a nurse. So again, involved in very, we'll go on, I think, to talk about the kind of community and community engagement elements. And I think that was, rather than sustainability, more the kind of community cohesion and the kind of resilience required. And I think very much from my upbringing, my older relatives lived in quite challenging areas of the city. We would obviously visit regularly, and you could see the kind of poverty and everything else around. But at the same time, you had the strength and the willingness to fight. And I don't think it's changed too much. There's been, some development and some funds coming in with the capital of culture. So central Liverpool looks very different to when I was a child, but obviously around that centre, there's still massive challenges. And so I say that.
And Andy, I'm really sorry to interrupt you there. Sorry, I'm fascinated by this. So you mentioned that kind of, and I think anyone who obviously understands British history can understand that there was this, the Thatcher years, if you like, were so polarizing, and there was such there was such sort of tension, if you like. What was the experience of somebody from Liverpool? What was the view really at that time of the political landscape? Like give us some detail as to what it was like. I mean, you had parents who were working kind of on the front line, if you like, in their roles of really understanding or experiencing the influence of that political landscape. Like what did you feel at that time as a young man seeing these things?
I think it's a kind of sense that you're right. You can see what's happening. You're being told it isn't happening. in a kind of wider media sense, and there's very classic examples of that. You could see the kind of the industry moving out. You could see the money moving out. You could see the struggles that people had. You were being told that this wasn't necessarily so. Obviously, years later, to have a document that came out of a cabinet meeting speaking about the managed decline of a whole city it was quite staggering. But that came later, and a similar example would be around Hillsborough. Again, at the time, voices were shut down. There's definite stereotypes going around. Years later, the truth comes out, but at that point, it's kind of it's removed from the actual. When people are really struggling to be heard and to be listened to be understood. And I think it was just a general, obviously as a young child, you just accept your surroundings as they were. And that's where the balance comes, the kind of family, the community aspect. So, but what your eyes are looking at when you see the kind of decline and so on, is different to what was happening within the family and the kind of, as I say, the discussions and the actual resilience and the belief and so on. So it's a kind of dichotomy of those two things, but you are, you were looking at, when I was a child, there was still kind of bomb sites and obviously housing, derelict housing and so on. Not where I lived. I was in a nice suburb of Liverpool, but, my extended family were in that. So it was like it, we were not detached from that. We visited, all of the time. We were very close family. So you're not detached from challenges that are happening. And that's the impact. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Sorry, Andy. I was just going to ask you on that. Like, it's fascinating that you described that, because do you think that kind of provided the context in which you mentioned how the family, debated and discussed and raised these issues? Do you think that could kind of provided the perfect conditions for you to become really kind of inspired by your clarity around right or wrong? Do you think you were that almost those conditions provided you with that kind of breeding ground of that really clear sense of, well, authenticity in terms of you mentioning there about the government and about, we've been told one thing, but actually quite clearly I can see that something else is going on here. Do you think that really helped you in that sense?
Absolutely, 100%. I was, very political as a early teenager, I suppose, around that time. And very, the kind of right and wrong has absolutely stayed with me, and clarity on it, no doubt about that, and the importance of, education, of health, of community structure, of housing, all of these elements, certainly, which, in some ways are just as bad, if not worse now across the UK and the wider world. But yeah, definitely, I think it gave me a very clear kind of set of values. And so when, things would come on the news, there was, certainly always an opinion, and, it would always be a similar opinion, obviously. And it would be, I guess, very much, I suppose I don't want to use the word underdog. I don't think that's the right word, but people who were marginalized or, that lack of fairness, lack of equality, has certainly, been brought into, I guess, the jobs that I've had within my career. And that kind of, the kind of right and wrong has certainly stayed with me.
And presumably it gave you that kind of healthy skepticism to question things, to say, well, I'm not going to accept just what's presented to me. I'm going to use my own intuition. I'm going to use my own understanding and appreciation of things in order to determine whether or not this can or cannot be trusted. And in that sense, kind of knowing what we're going to come on to talk about in terms of your career's development, that must be a really key characteristic, if you like, in terms of the work that you now do. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, I think, yes, definitely. But it's so difficult now. Because truth is just, see what is happening now and has happened for the last sort of 4, 5, 10 years, maybe, with Trump and truth, fake news, it's just so obscene and ridiculous now. That people openly say things that not just they used to say things that were untrue. Now they say things that are ridiculously untrue, and it kind of goes even further than just denying things or saying, no, that, this didn't happen, or no, it's because of X, Y, and Z. Now people, political people come out with statements that are so obviously untrue, but then they get backed up and they get repeated and they get produced as fact. So it's a whole different landscape. I think back then it was more yes and no. You took one side or the other. It was, Labour Conservative. It was, right and wrong. It was, and there were different ideologies and different opinions. Now it's so much more difficult, I think, in terms of, away from jobs and careers, just, looking at the news and trying to form an opinion on things, because you did used to be able, you may not agree with someone, but you did used to argue and certain little bit, someone else might accept your opinion, or you could say, okay, well, maybe that, but I disagree with the other 90%. Now, if someone is saying something that is so patently untrue, where do you go there? How do you debate? How do you have an honest debate? And so, I think, that's a whole different conversation. I guess we've probably strayed in.
That's show number, Andy, that's show number 2 or 3 or 4. If we get a sub-series going with Andy Norris. Andy, I've brilliantly, though, jumped in and asked you loads of questions about, like, you're growing up in Liverpool, and we haven't had a chance to touch on what happens next in terms of your career, but just give us a sense of from those kind of early stages, like what did you do at kind of higher education, and what did you then do in the early part of your career? And just give us a flavor of kind of what happens next.
Well, I guess having said all of that about Liverpool, by the time I was 18, I wanted to move away. And so, because I was 18, I was all of those really positive things we talked about, which also involved, kind of everybody knowing each other and, everybody getting away from that to London was my aim. And that first few years in London, when nobody knows you and nobody says anything to you, was actually quite a bit of a release, I suppose, a bit of freedom. I didn't speak to anyone, but it's definitely those things that you then value later on, which is standing at a bus stop or a train station. And in Liverpool, you will get talked to, you'll get asked about anything, whereas in London, it's that anonymity. But also I had a relative, a cousin of mine was in London, so I'd visited and just loved the city, loved the kind of vastness of it, but that anonymity as well. But so that was my aim, was to move to London. At that point, I didn't want to carry on in education. I'd done my A-levels, so I went down. I got a job.
And Andy,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. What did you do your A-levels in? What were you drawn to in terms of your education?
English, literature, history, economics. I wasn't particularly drawn to economics, but it was, certainly literature. Always fascinated with history, but mainly literature. Always loved reading from a very, very young age. Again, it's building up that knowledge to inform those discussions and debates, but also just fiction and biographies and, everything else. So, so English literature, history and economics I did.
And then in terms of London, what happened next?
I moved down. I lived with my cousin for about 3 months until my cousin's wife, who's lovely, told me it was maybe time for me to move. And so I did that. I got a job, got on a manager's program for what was then TSB Bank. And I worked in Hammersmith. Within about 2 or 3 weeks, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Certainly didn't want to be in a suit, and becoming a manager for TSB bank. Although maybe if I'd stuck at it, I would be, in a pretty good position now. But I decided, I then to college. Well, at the time it was called Roehampton Institute, which is kind of Putney.
Mm-hmm.
And I did English literature and history degree. And I suppose also at this point, the most formative thing really for me, which I haven't mentioned, and does link, I'll try and link it at some point later on to sustainability and social responsibility in the jobs I've had, is music. So music was massive in my life. Obviously, coming from Liverpool, you had the Beatles, and that was my kind of first. My mum had a couple of their records, and just looking at the pictures when I was 3 or 4, and the music that came out. From that point on, I got totally obsessed with music, and then started played piano, played guitar. And so that was the other thing about the London move, was to meet people and join a band. So through college, university, I did that. And then after university, I just took up music full time. I was playing in bands. So this would be, just kind of post the whole Britpop thing. So there was, I think a lot of them are still there, but lots of places to play in London, obviously. And so I did that for possibly about 4 or 5 years, kind of seriously full time.
Wow.
Working occasionally, just to get a bit of extra money, but not really having a, I didn't have a fallback option really. I kind of went for it. Obviously, had some fantastic times, made some great recordings, had a recording contract very briefly for about 6 months before that imploded. And so I then obviously was left, I think I was about 29, something like that, thinking, okay, well, what, I haven't stopped playing, I haven't stopped writing music, but obviously I needed to think, what else can I kind of, do to earn money.
And Andy, it's fascinating. By the way, we're obviously on YouTube and Spotify and stuff. Can anyone possibly find any Andy Norris music out there that they can check out? And if they can, we're definitely linking to it.
Yes, I think there's bits and pieces out there, but I'd have to. There's definitely stuff. I can send you some links. I probably need to find it and vet it first, but there's some. I think there's some gig footage and other bits and pieces. So not back from sort of the kind of 90s, but there's some later stuff. Yeah, definitely. I could
definitely be looking to feature that if you're happy for us to. This might be a difficult question to answer, and therefore feel free to just bat it away. But first of all, I absolutely love when I talk to people who talk about that early stage of their career when they went for it, as I think the words that you used. They had this dream. It's a up against it in terms of the chances of it working, but they go for it. You're 29 years old and you've gone for it with your dream passion, if you like, in terms of becoming a professional musician or growing into the rest of your career being a professional musician. What was it like for you personally, getting to that point of saying, well, actually, maybe I now need to be a bit more pragmatic and think about things in a different way? Like, what was that like for you on a personal level, making that decision?
It was, I don't know, it was funny because I actually joined another band, and the 3 other people in the band all had full-time jobs. So it's kind of like, oh, that's different, and they were all a couple of years younger than me. So I think it was kind of a wake-up call almost and also I'd met, my Claire, who's my wife now. I'd met Claire, and there's just sort of a general change in that, I don't have to give it up, but I don't have to be in With Nail and I anymore. I suppose that's for anyone who's seen that film.
I love the fact that you've referenced With Nell and I. That is, we've got music, we've got gig playing, we've got With Nell and I. I'm sorry, this is totally off topic, Andy, but one of the greatest lines in any film ever is and I hope you'll concur with me on this. What is it? Excuse me, officer. I've only had a couple of ales. Is that right? Is that scene when he runs down the window?
Yeah, when they're driving back from Wales. Yeah, I mean, it's there's so many lines, and it's and that's when if you're 23, that's okay to live like that. But yeah, when you're pushing 30, but the film it is amazing because it just shows you, you do have a choice at that point. If you're doing something creatively and you haven't, it's not earning you money to make a living. Obviously, the two characters there, they take two different paths. One, obviously gets a kind of break, but you can see within that character, if it doesn't work out, he will go off and do something else. He may keep acting and doing whatever, but he's more practical. And then obviously, you've got With Nail, who that's not going to end too well, I don't think. So, I guess the practical side of me, which, is probably always there. And again, linked back to my upbringing and my background, came through, and it was like, okay, well, I'm going to keep doing it because I can't not do it. But I do need to think, what I can do and what else, I can enjoy and what else I can, make a living at and so on. So that brought that change. But I didn't, I stayed within music. So I worked at Virgin Retail, which initially was in the, they used to have a big shop on Oxford Street. And then I got a job in the head office. And the theme for later on in my career starts at this point where I get jobs I have absolutely no knowledge of, but I get opportunities. And I've been very lucky. I've been handed things that quite often are quite new, particularly when we get onto the university that I worked at. They need someone to give it a go. And so that's been a kind of theme through my career. So at Virgin, I started with a finance job. I then did marketing. I did buying. And so that was over a period of about 3 or 4 years. And but the issue around that, every kind of 6 months there were redundancies. It was a very tragic time for retail, particularly music retail. Supermarkets were selling music. The margins were going down and down. And so I thought I need to, move on before I don't have any choice. So, and again, I didn't have any kind of pathway or, and certainly, I guess don't have a plan. Let's see what happens. I was not necessarily advice I would give to my daughter, but it seems to be how I've had to do it or how I've done it. So I just really moved on then I thought I fancy a different kind of environment away from that retail. A job came up at the University of Westminster, which was just an administrative role, working within the estates and facilities team. And again, without that job, I wouldn't have landed where I am today. But that nearly didn't last. I started on the first day. There was one of the facilities. It was quite a male environment, put it that way. So this is around about 2006. And he said to me, "Why are you working here?" And I thought he meant, what am I doing? So I started blathering on about, well, it's finance, it's to do with it. And he said, no, why are you here? And I think he kind of looked at me and just thought, you don't fit. He turned out to be a really nice guy. He was an ex-soldier, very matter of fact, but, I think it was, just, so I very nearly just walked out at that point, but I didn't. I stuck. Wow. And within 6 months, I got, this is the first example of, things that just pop up. a new role came up around business continuity. Quite new to university, higher education sector at that point. All universities had a big folder on the side about if there's a crisis, but no one ever looked at it. I went for the role. It was internally advertised, and I got it. And it was the first time, it just looked interesting dealing with kind of crisis response, making plans to avoid crisis. And within the first week that I got the job, there's a site up in Harrow where the arts department was. The building burnt down. So
God.
So
week one.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely unbelievable. But I enjoyed the experience, and I think the thing I took from that, which again is I think is one of the critical things, especially around any job, but sustainability, social responsibility. A group is set up of all of the business continuity people across universities, and we used to meet because most people were in a similar boat, which was, okay, how do we do this? What does it mean? And so on. And I met some amazing people who'd had previous careers, again, within the army, within the Navy, a submarine commander, police, they tended to be from that background. So I'd kind of come a long way quite quickly from, gigs in Camden to talking to a submarine commander. And I actually ended up chairing that group. I was pushed forward by all these much more experienced people. I don't think they wanted the kind of the administrative bit of it. But again, it was just an amazing learning experience. But again, the kind of resilience bit comes in, but because around 2009, there was a massive restructure at the university. And I was part of a strategy and performance team still within estates. We had two other people in there who we had a sustainability manager and an energy and environment manager. One dealt with the kind of change behavior kind of projects. One dealt with the carbon reduction. Both exited. One left, one exited. Neither role was filled, and I was asked, would I do both roles plus the business continuity? So a lot to take on, but this is different. This is new. Could be interesting. I said yes. So then I found myself doing both of those sides. So we had, I assume it's still running, called Green Impact, which was a change behavior project set up by the National Union of Students, but it was also for staff. So we had lots of stuff around that and running those kind of competitions each year and just trying to engage and talk about sustainability, talk about carbon reduction. And then on the other side, I found myself suddenly in boiler rooms and doing display energy certificates and poring over utility bills and etc. And doing that other kind of, and also the ISO 14001, doing all of that. And just really, again, it was new, it was different, but I really, kind of enjoyed, I think particularly my brain isn't massively technical. I have to try quite hard at that side. But it is kind of that people, that community, that kind of aspect back in around the kind of change behavior, but also the resilience. And everyone who's involved in this area will know the amount of times that you are maybe sat in a room for an event with 3 people. That linked back, I've done gigs with 3 people. I've done gigs with, and that I'm managing to link it tenuously in now, but that kind of resilience and being able to go, okay, well, there's 3 of us here. Let's talk about, sustainability. Let's talk about what you understand by it. Let's talk about, go ahead, Sean.
But Andy, I think there is a really nice, and by the way, that was super interesting. And I didn't jump in with any your timeline of events was absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers are super interested to understand the different sort of segue points, if you like, that you've gone throughout your career. And by the way, for any of our listeners that do want to check out Andy's career in full, we'll obviously link to his LinkedIn profile, etc., so you guys can go and check it out. But I do think there is a link, and it kind of comes back to, you mentioned there about you've been given opportunities throughout your career to take on things that were new and scary and things that you didn't necessarily feel in the moment that you were necessarily fully like had the experience for because they were totally new. But there needed to be, you've used the term resilience. For me, there's a courage in your approach, if you like, that probably does stem back to the courage that you showed as a young man in seeing that, you know, being a musician was something that you wanted to pursue and go all in on.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned those guys that you joined the band with when you got to sort of 29 that had full-time jobs and were looking at the musical side of things. I think that there's such strength in being all in for that period that you were. And that would have built this sense of, I can adapt and I can, you know, persevere within things that I don't necessarily feel totally comfortable with. So for me, I always keen to kind of draw lessons out of people's experience that can be applied to maybe some of the younger people listening into our show. For me, that's a really important lesson that can be drawn from your experience. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, you have to go all in, and I certainly don't regret that. I mean, I could have done something else that you know, that is a key time, obviously, you know, age sort of 20 up to 26, 27. And so, no, I don't regret it. I had amazing experiences and, you know, lived, ate and breathed music, you know, constantly. So I don't regret it. I think even now, I suppose it's changed a little bit. You know, you have the kind of side hustle things. So I think kids now do, you know, still have certain dreams and things they focus on. Maybe they also do side hustles as well. I mean, I suppose my side hustles at the time were possibly, you know, a week of work somewhere, helping someone out and getting some money, or taking on a part-time job for like a month or two or whatever it might be. So I think kids are maybe a bit more creative now and get involved in lots of different things. But definitely, I think being all in then sets you up to kind of focus in on what it is you want to achieve. So, you know, it definitely, you know, yeah, I think that kind of parallel from that experience within music has definitely carried me forward. Along with, I think, the kind of performance element, which if you're trying to speak to people, hold a room, present, senior meeting, you know, not that I don't get nervous around those things, but I used to get nervous playing a gig, you know, but once I was on, I only got nervous waiting. And once I was on, then I was good. And again, you know, to have to, because it's a constant, and I think the article that we'll move on to later kind of touches on this. It's almost like you're constantly having to sell and resell the concept of sustainability and social responsibility, particularly in a kind of commercial environment. And so being able to kind of stand up and, as I say, even if it's present or just sit in a senior meeting and present or respond, I think that's definitely, because again, that's not something everyone can do. No, you know, people can be brilliant and absolutely fantastic in lots of different ways, but that kind of public speaking is quite a challenge for them. So I think that element has really helped as well.
It's super interesting. It has come up, Andy, on some other shows where we've talked about like the role of the sustainability or ESG professional in convincing and encouraging and presenting essentially others to kind of follow or to re-engage with some of the topics. And I think it's such a perhaps under-highlighted quality that we need within the profession, if you like. You can probably see from the time, Andy, that we have absolutely obliterated the normal timings on things. And I did say that my production guys are getting hotter and tighter on me. So what we're going to do, if possible, I know we haven't been able to talk about like the full length of your career from that stage, but obviously our listeners and viewers can go and check out your LinkedIn profile. And we will talk about your current role, I think, during our reflections on the article. But let's move on to the article if possible. Yeah. Would you mind, Andy, just providing a bit of a summary of, I think it was Sarah Ansell's piece in True Impact from from this year. Provide just a bit of a summary of what the article covers, and then perhaps just pick out for you whatever you thought were the most interesting points made within the piece.
Yeah, sure. So the article, well, it's called 5 Strategies for Accountability and Authenticity. And the actual premise it's kind of based on was a little bit, I suppose it was a bit depressing in some ways, but we've touched upon it, and that was one thing that stood out to me. So it's that within 2025, the prediction is that we may move on from CSR is a nice thing to have to CSR teams must prove that CSR is a nice thing to have. And so almost like a backward step in a way, we kind of intimating we'd reached that point where it was accepted. Okay, we need to do this. Senior teams maybe don't necessarily understand it, but they understand it needs to be done, to kind of now going back to say, okay, prove it. And maybe that's linked into some of the wider things, obviously around, say, equality, diversity, inclusion that's happening in the States, and things being removed, and that's enabling other people to then push at other things that have gained traction. So I guess it's a warning in some ways. So the thrust of the article is connecting corporate purpose with measurable community impact, and then linking back to the company's success. So, basically, it's about creating real value both for the business and for the local communities itself. And they outline 5 strategies to do this. The first one is around data, localized analytics and data, and how we're able to measure impact and obviously within a local community or area. The second one is around integrating business and social value, which, as you said, my new role within Liberator, one element is around social value. And within when we're bidding for contracts that we have, how we measure impact around that. So that was obviously resonated with me. Strengthening climate action assessments was the third one. The fourth was around the frameworks and the metrics that we use. And then the fifth one, I must admit, is a completely unknown area to me. So maybe I'll get offered a job in any day soon. Is so yeah, how we can use AI in terms of embedding CSR within companies. So that they were the strategies, and obviously it's there's kind of solutions around all of those 5 strategies that are offered within the article. So yeah, I guess for me it's that the premise that it's built on, which for me within Liberator, that's not necessarily the case. Every contract we bid for now has the kind of 10%, sometimes 5%, sometimes a bit more in terms of social value and how we're going to embed that within the contract and deliver on that. So while that's a kind of commercial imperative, I think there is definitely an understanding that this is, it's not a nice to have it is essential. But obviously, there's lots of different businesses, different sectors, and I think it's maybe being put forward as a warning that this may be something that comes under threat because of the current, political environment, which is, I guess, where we started, in terms of discussing that.
And we very much have, Andy, and it's interesting kind of drawing parallels, I guess, and history repeating itself. But let me ask you this. In the case that you've just described, and I'm only playing devil's advocate here, so I'm hoping that I'm laying you up for a nice forward defensive that you'll be able to sort of knock this back. But would you say there is this sense of ESG, CSR, geopolitical backlash, if you like, and questioning of like, what is the value in this beyond, framework submissions and characteristics, sort of, you say 5 to 10% requiring, submissions around social value and perhaps ESG credentials being part of the submission criteria. What are the other values that an organization would redeem from continuing to invest in CSR, ESG, etc.?
Well, there's a broad range. I think, the current, younger generation coming up, this is, something that is not even questioned. It's similar, the whole debate around gender that's happened recently. Certainly when I speak to my daughter, this is not a debate that they're having. They don't really understand that. I think same with sustainability and, carbon reduction. This is not something that is debatable. And so I think that, to be actually current, to be contemporary, to be, kind of with or ahead of that curve, it's an essential. It's obviously then you can move on. It's the right thing to do. And with it being within the commercial contract, then it can be the difference between work and not working, because 10% is quite a lot. There's not massive differences, in terms of price and the product that different companies, when they're competing, will offer, and there's very little room to vary that price. You can do that and maybe win the contract, but then you're not going to be able to deliver. So that 10% and growing is really just forward thinking. You need to be able to evidence that impact, and that will ultimately, moving forward, will bring in more work than if you don't pay any attention to it whatsoever and just rely on the fact that you can maybe cut corners, lower the price, and bring the work in that way, or just really just maintain the work you're doing. And obviously that will at some point disappear, or someone will come along with the social value element completely nailed down, and they will take that work from you. So it's such a key element of the bidding process now, that it would be reckless not to do it, and not to really embed it within your strategy, within the way that your business operates, within your values, and the return on it obviously is massive as well, particularly again around employability, employing people through contracts, employing people within local areas, affecting the local economy, building partnerships. There is no downside to it. And that's quite often, when the question is asked, well, justify CSR, whoever asks you that question would struggle to justify not doing it. So if you turn it back on and ask them, okay, well, why shouldn't we do it? What is it? What's the advantage of not doing this? They will not, I'd be surprised how they would answer that question. So it's an essential element.
And Andy, thank you. That was a beautifully played forward defensive. I'll use my cricket analogy. You played that with a very straight bat. So that was brilliant. You mentioned that throughout your career at various different stages working within sustainability and CSR more broadly, that there's always that need to kind of reconvince and sort of encourage adoption and speak to senior people within organizations, get them over the line. In light of like the current atmosphere or context that we find ourselves in, are those conversations changing from your perspective, or are things just remaining very much as they've always been? Or give us a flavor of what it's like on the ground, if you like, in terms of what the article alludes to.
I don't think it's... I don't know, because obviously within a commercial environment, I think to be questioned and to be asked, what is the impact? I don't think there's any issue with that. It's very competitive out there. And so to have to justify, what the work that you're doing, the impact that you're having, you've been given X amount of pounds to develop a project, to implement it as part of our social value. We can then use that to, bid for other work. So what is the impact? And I think that's absolutely reasonable. Whether it's changed, I guess we will find out, because it's the next step. So what used to then happen is, because not everything works. Some things will have big impact. Other things won't have the impact that you wanted for various reasons. A partner you work with is not around the next year, or, it just, you thought there'd be 20 apprenticeships and there's only 14, whatever it might be. And then other things overperform. But what used to happen, I think, was if there was any restructure I've been through at the university, they immediately separated things into nice to have and business critical. And sustainability, equality and diversity always went onto the nice to have pile. And so I think what has hopefully, or we'll see what has changed, is if we have an impact and this is what we've done and it's put forward, if for whatever reason it's then measured and people, certain projects don't meet what they need to meet, others do better, whatever it is, the response then isn't used as an excuse to not do it. It could be a reason to say, thanks, Andy, it's been nice having you here. We're going to get someone better in who's going to get us the impact that we want. That's absolutely fine, but the actual work doesn't go away. Sorry, it's not fine. I don't want to use my... The point is, it's about performance and impact, which is absolutely as it should be. But it's not then used as an excuse for other parts of the business to say, "Oh, I told you so." It's this. What is this thing anyway? It's all about price. It's all about its own. So I think that's hopefully what hasn't changed, and what needs to happen is that the CSR doesn't go away, or whatever you call it, within your organization, but that impact measurement is critical, and you need to hit those targets. That's absolutely fair. Yeah.
And crucially,
I'm not. So far, I'm not. I still work with, obviously people who do different elements within the bid, and so I focused on other areas. So not necessarily, but I don't necessarily understand their area 100%. And they're learning, about CSR, and that's where the impact helps, when people see stories and, understand where, and if they've been on a bid team with you, and then 6 months later, they can see something that happened. Oh, that bid we worked on and that thing we put forward, here it is, here's the evidence, here's the impact. Then they start to become part of it as well. So personally, no, I haven't, but I know the experience of being put in the nice to have pile, and I can see why potentially that might be something, again, around the kind of political environment that we're in.
But if we're right, but if we're able to lean in and clearly demonstrate that the investments have enabled us to win these contracts, or certainly have aided the winning of these contracts, and it's also aided the winning, if you like, of the hearts and the minds of the brilliant recruits that we've managed to bring into our organization. Those are the two kind of battlegrounds, if you like, in terms of how you go about clearly demonstrating why this isn't a nice to have, but this is a business essential and something that needs to be retained ongoing.
Exactly.
And let me ask you, I want to ask you, talking about data and analytics, the article alluded to this notion of place-based analytics. Can you just explain to our listeners and viewers what that actually means, and kind of within what context that affects the kind of work that you guys do?
Well, it's basically around how you measure your impact, and it's one of the real challenges. So when I worked at the university, we did something called an environmental and social impact report, and so what that did was it took certain activities that the university did, and it translated it into pennies and pounds, because this is a constant challenge. We can have the data, we can commit to X number of projects, and we can commit to work placements, we can commit to different, so I'm working with a lot of kind of within education at the moment. So Could be kids that have fallen out of education, kids who've been in, care leavers and so on. So you can have numbers, and then you try and hit those numbers. But the other side of it is trying to put value onto other activities that you do. So, for example, within the university, it was volunteering hours. It was things like having social events, giving parts of the property out for free so people could hold events, so putting money onto that. So it's all of that activity that you have to decide, but at a very local level. That's what the article is looking at. And it's how you get that information, which is a challenge. So you have to start with, what are the challenges for that particular area? They can be quite similar across the UK, especially within cities. It's around, employability. It's around education, but it's finding that where that data is, and that can be so challenging, particularly. So a lot of our contracts in Liberator are with local government. Local government's very stretched. So to find that data, to then to be able to impact on those local challenges, I think that's what within this article they're saying is going to be key. Because otherwise you run the risk of, when you do your impact report, if you're completely reliant on, I guess, kind of the storytelling element, if you don't have the hard data, then that impact, you'll be dealing with people who are used to dealing with hard data and hard facts. So it's about how you are able to gather that data, who to work with to do that, and then how you analyze it. So that's a key thing, but quite difficult to do.
And Andy, is the outcome of this that if you, and again, I might be massively oversimplifying this, so feel free to tell me otherwise, but is it almost like if we don't use sort of place-based analytics and get a really clear understanding of the impact of our initiatives in a local level, shall I say, or in a local context, that there's a tendency or a concern that we almost become a bit tone deaf in our approach because we're not really understanding the issues on that local level. We're trying to overgeneralize perhaps the way that we're approaching social value, and therefore not sort of factoring in the nuance, if you like, of that particular area and what that particular community needs. Is that if we don't do this, the implication? Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. But I think I guess where I would deviate from the article is data is, and data is king in many ways. And that's how, you can really measure your impact. But actually it's about people as well. So you do have to go into the community. You have to meet people. I mean, a classic example again back in the university was we were inundated following the Grenfell fire with offers from students and staff as well. What can we do? How can we help? And the point is, you can't. And at the site at Grenfell, they were inundated by people they'd never seen before, had never shown any interest in the area or their lives, now turning up. And I think the people they will have worked with, who are people who were there before, and that different community organizations. And that was a big lesson for me. You have to find out who are the key organizations within that local area. And that's where you start. You don't start with data. And that goes back to resilience. You may have events meetings where there's only 2 or 3 people or a few people that you're affecting, but you have to keep building those relationships. They are absolutely key because they are the people that will tell you what the challenges within that community are. And they're the people that tell you what the solutions are as well. And that goes back to where we started, I guess, those discussions, around the family dinner table. Sometimes those different, it is about the only way you will understand an area is through the people, and then the data can come in. But that's a different kind of area and a different, how you go about that. I think it's quite challenging. But without understanding the issues and the challenges and the solutions, then it's that's where you need to start.
Yeah, you've nailed that, Andy. I love that as a sort of a strategic sort of direction for anyone to take, is to understand the people first, and that then gives you the context within which you can then understand the data and presumably potentially leverage the understanding of the people and the relationships that you build in order to support the data requirement as well. Andy, you can see that we've, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface with this article, but we will link to the article piece for anybody else to kind of check out. If you've got any particular questions relating to this article and you want Andy's take on it, please feel free to leave a comment on YouTube, etc. And I might see if I can get Andy to possibly share his thoughts with us on a few of those responses. But for now, Andy, if possible, can we move on to conclude with the magic one question? I am fascinated to see what you're going to do with this, considering some of the conversation that we've had today and the previous chat that we've had. Andy, if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
It would be that the CSR, sustainability, ESG, however you are talking about it within your organization, is moved from the nice to have pile into business critical and is nailed into business critical. And that choice is taken away. It is there. It's there for a lot of companies anyway, but where it isn't, it is never deemed as nice to have ever again.
Here. You get a here, Andy. I give out here's to magic wand suggestions that I think are particularly, reasonable and sensible and have a potentially significant impact. It's a brilliant suggestion. Andy, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That was it was a really, really interesting conversation. I know we've gone massively over, but I'm sure our listeners and viewers will have found it equally as interesting. Thank you for joining us this morning.
No, thank you, Charlie. It's been fantastic, and a proper discussion again. And feel free to edit if I've waffled on in any direction. It did meander here and there. So, feel free. Again, back to that kind of musical analogy. I've edited many things and chucked out many bits and pieces. So feel free to do that.
Perfect. What a great way to end. Thanks, Andy. And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Andy Norris, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at Liberata, for joining me. In this episode, we explored what it means to lead with purpose in 2025 and how CSR professionals like Andy are helping to ensure that corporate purpose translates into measurable impact, both for communities and the business itself. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Andrew Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit andrewgreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.